Andrew Peeke is a 25-year-old defenseman who some Blue Jackets fans are willing to blame the entire last two seasons of terrible hockey for. It's his season review today on Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Hayden Heilshorn. With me is my co-host, Jay Foster. We're here to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of your favorite team and ours, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get going here, I want to thank you all for making this your first listen every day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms, YouTube, and even the SiriusXM app. It's season review time. We've done all the forwards in the organization. I've had a very enjoyable time doing that. Now we're looking at the defensemen in the organization. And I think, Jay, you and I both know that the defense is not going to be as fun to review. Probably some low scores here, but that's okay. Certainly one stuck out to us. Certainly one's stuck out for bad reasons. Some stuck out for good reasons. But today it's Andrew Peeke time. And it seems like, Jay, this past September, when the Blue Jackets signed him to a 3-year deal worth $8.5 million, it was like, whoa, okay, Blue Jackets really believe in this guy they did the same thing with Gudbranson too. They threw a ton of money at him, and it's kind of like, why are we giving all this money to these defensemen? And that was back in the offseason, back in September. We didn't know what this version of the Blue Jackets team was going to be. But then when you look at the production out of Andrew Peeke, and it's not good. I mean, minus 41 on the year. He had less than 20 points. It was not a good season for him. He had 20-something penalty minutes. That was actually not terrible. That could have been a lot worse. But I said at the top here that a lot of people, when they want to blame the defense, they just throw Andrew Peeke in there immediately. I don't think that's totally fair because he is just 25. He is getting more NHL experience year by year, but I personally think from the last 2 years where he got tons of time, he regressed from year one of Brad Larson to year two of Brad Larson. I think he took a step back. Do you feel that same way, just right off the bat?
Yeah, 100%. The thing about Andrew Peeke is hindsight's 2020, right? It's easy for us to sit here now and look at the defense for the Blue Jackets and go, well, why are we giving the combination of Erik Gudbranson and Andrew Peeke, $6.5, almost $7 million between the two of them? That's a lot of money. And if the Blue Jackets had known what they knew now, which is that obviously David Severson has come on board, he's making a chunk of change. 6.25. Ivan Provorov's making almost $5 million. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money held up in the defense. Currently, there's $21 million in the defense, plus Zach Werenski and Jake Bean's cap hit, which is another almost $3 million, another almost $12 million on top of that. So $33 million of what's the cap hit? $83 million?
Yeah, just over 80.
A lot of money tied up in the defense. And I think if the Blue Jackets had known that they were going to have to revamp the decor kind of on the fly like this, I don't know that Andrew Peeke gets that money.
No, I mean, but that's the thing is the Jackets are stuck with him for another 2 years unless he somehow becomes tradable, which people do love to, go to the Jackets for trades late in the year. I mean, it just happened this past year with Vladislav Gavrikov. He had a terrible season as well, not to spoil what tomorrow's episode's going to be. Just tradable because he's got 2 years left on it. So anybody that would want a kind of young defenseman who has 195 games of NHL experience, absolutely have at it. He's done some things well. I think he actually has a lot of speed. I think I think that's pretty much it though for him. I think this past year, I think he can be physical at times, definitely he can be physical at times. It's kind of how he earned that contract, I'd say, because the year before that, it felt like Andrew Peeke was all over the ice making plays. Like, man, this guy Peeker, like we really like this guy. And then last year he gets tons and tons of time, especially a lot of time on the penalty kill with Zach Werenski going down. And it was just not good stuff. And I was watching a little bit of that terrible Tage Thompson 4-goal night that the Sabres had against the Jackets. I pained myself to watch that. And like, it's not like every goal Peeke was on the ice, but this seemed like there were a lot of goals in that game where could have used a little bit more coverage, especially on the penalty kill out of him. And I don't know what it's going to take to pull that out of him, but he had 80 games this past year. He had 80 chances to really show us something and give us hope, and only 13 points in production on offense, and minus 41 is not good. And yeah, it's disappointing because this is a Big Ten hockey player. The guy, played at Notre Dame, and I love my college hockey players just as much as the next guy, but he could be falling by the wayside here, which isn't good because the Blue Jackets got a lot of money in him. Do you see him making the third D pair?
That's a tough question. In my mind, he is the fourth option to play on. And we talked about this a couple episodes ago, maybe. It's kind of tough to say how the decor is going to shake out, but in my mind, it should shake out something like this. You've got your top four of Werenski, Jiricek, Severson, Provorov in whatever combination you want. And then you've got Erik Gudbranson on that third pairing because you're not going to put $4 million in the press box. You just aren't. So you've got one open spot. In my mind, Andrew Peeke should be at the back of the line for that spot. I think he is probably the fourth worst option out of kind of so we've got Adam Boquist, Jake Bean, Nick Blankenberg, who in my mind, all three of those guys are ahead of Andrew Peeke on the depth chart. That being said, I don't know that any of those three guys have a third pairing kind of game. I think all three of those guys are potential top four guys. I think they'll struggle playing limited minutes on the third pairing, playing a limited kind of style of hockey. I think Andrew Peeke is the most likely player to slot in there. I don't know that he's the best one. And this is, of course, assuming that all four of those guys are on their opening night roster, because like Nick Blankenberg is probably going to get sent down to Cleveland, which fine, whatever. I don't love it. Cleveland Monsters fans are going to love it. I will be shocked if there are more than two of Peeke, Bean, and Boquist on the roster. I expect at least one of those guys, maybe two of them, to get moved. And I think Andrew Peeke is probably one of the more tradable contracts. It's more than I would like, but it's not $1 bajillion. He's a right-handed defenseman, which people love a right-handed defenseman because there's just not that many of them. And he's big and he plays big. And GMs love that. Coaches love that. He feels kind of obsolete for this team right now. I think he would be a very good seventh defenseman. He's young enough that he can kind of jump in whenever. I've mentioned before, I think Scott Harrington, who was a perfect seventh defenseman. He was young. He was not good enough to be a full-time NHL player. I think Peeke is better than Harrington, but I think he can kind of fit that role just as well as Scott Harrington did. Of, hey, there's an injury, someone's ill, there's a suspension, whatever reason, someone's not playing their best game, they want to sit them for a game, Andrew Peeke jumps in. Like, that's my ideal situation for Andrew Peeke next season, is that seventh defenseman role. But do you want $3 million worth of defensemen sitting in the press box every night is the question.
Yeah, I don't know if you do. And I actually want to make a correction here of a mistake that I've already made. I will do that shortly after the commercial break here. First, I want to tell you guys about our friends at FanDuel. This is a fantastic place if you are looking to get into Major League Baseball betting. Take your first swing at betting Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 that you can spend betting everything involving a baseball game, from the money line to over-under on who you think is going on the over-under on the game, or who you think is going to hit the first home run, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly like that. It's amazing. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. You get that $200 bonus. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, I want to make a correction on this Andrew Peeke thing, because he signed a 3-year contract in September, but that contract kicks in this year. So he's got 3 years starting this year with Columbus, which, like, it just seems crazy to me that he's going to be getting paid that much. And he had the season that he had last year. It was very disappointing, man. It was very disappointing. He's got 3 years left on his deal, so he's got time, I guess, to figure it out. But with the moves that Jarmo has made this offseason, it does not seem like he is comfortable with Andrew Peeke being anywhere near the top 2D pair, and he's going to have to scrap to get his playing time this year. Again, we know at some point in this season, it feels like Zach Werenski's probably going to be out for like 40 games, and maybe he gets his chance. I hope that doesn't happen. I hope actually we can get Zach to play an 80-game season just like Provorov and Severson have done, and Peeke did last year. Peeke played 80 games. So he is reliable in that fashion, but man, it does feel like there's some areas in his game that he needs to clean up. For me personally, it's the penalty kill. I think I need to see a little bit more better footwork on the penalty kill. I need him to cover a little bit more ice, because you're down a man. I think it should go without saying. You need to do a better job covering more ice. So that's where I'm at with Andrew Peeke on what he needs to improve on. I know that's a little bit early on a give him a homework situation, but with training camp coming up here, he's going to have to win the favor of Mike Babcock somehow over a guy like you've mentioned, like Jake Bean, Adam Boquist, Nick Blankenberg, all guys who have tremendous upside on their offensive game, which I don't think Andrew Peeke has tremendous upside on his offensive game. So we're going to give him homework, don't worry. But like, where are you going for your homework with him, do you think, already? Like, where do you think he needs to dial in the most and focus on his game?
Honestly, yeah, I think for me, it's a similar issue, or not issue, but Andrew Peeke, I feel like, is a defensive defenseman that would like to be an offensive defenseman. And what happens when you try and do that is you fail to do your own defensive coverage, and you usually don't end up providing that offense. Andrew Peeke had 17 points this season, I believe. I just looked it up and then immediately forgot it.
I think it was 13, actually. I also just 13, looked it up. Yes. I think it was only 13 points
6 goals
in 80
and 7
games.
Assists. And like that's fine. If you are a defenseman that doesn't score, that's fine. I'm not asking everyone to go out and do what Erik Karlsson did this season. But if you're gonna be a defensive defenseman like Peeke is, you have to be better defensively. His possession numbers this season were brutal. His Corsi for percentage, 38.23. That's just not good enough. There were over 1,000 shots against when he was on the ice in all situations. And that gets a little better when you look at 5v5, but not much. I'm using naturalstattrick.com, by the way, for these, which is a fantastic resource. So he was 43.6 Corsi for percentage in 5v5 play, and 768 shots against versus 601 shots for at 5v5. So like his 5v5 numbers need to be better. But yeah, the penalty kill needs to be better. I like Andrew Peeke a lot, and when he's on his game, he's good.
He's really good.
You know, again,
Yeah.
I think we saw a completely different player this season that we saw last season. I think partially that again is I'm gonna go and say it. He was playing too much for the role that he plays. Would you like to guess, Hayden? This is for all strengths. How where he stands in terms of defense, and do you think he was the defenseman that played the most ice time, the second most ice time, the third most ice time? Where do you think he falls in the defenseman that played this season?
Based off the money that the Blue Jackets signed him to and the injuries that they had and the fact that he played 80 games, I'm going to say he's safely in the top 2. I'm going to say he's number 1 in minutes
You
played.
are correct. He played more than any other player this season by a significant amount. He played 1,699 minutes. In second place for defenseman was Erik Gudbranson, who played 1,490 minutes.
Who was his D partner a lot of times. And
I don't know that it will give me that on Natural Stat Trick because it only does forward lines. But I would guess he played a ton of time with Gudbranson, and I would guess he played a ton of time with Vladislav Gavrikov.
Yes.
Because those were kind of the top 3 defensemen, so I would guess they rotated through them. Hey, he played some time with Nick Blankenberg, I think. Who's my option? By the way, that's my pick for that third pairing spot with Gudbranson. I think Gudbranson has the size. Blankenberg has the everything else, and plays like he's 6'6". We'll get into Nick Blankenberg a little bit more when we do his actual season review. But Andrew Peeke, to me, and this is not a knock on him, I feel like everything he does, the Blue Jackets have a defenseman that can do that better. You know? Like, he plays a similar game to Gudbranson, but I think Gudbranson does it with more snarl. He plays a similar game to a guy like Provorov, but I think Provorov does it better. You know, he shows these offensive flashes, but they don't need more offense from the back end necessarily, you know, now that they've got, hopefully, a healthy Werenski and, you know, maybe a guy like Blankenberg and, you know, Provorov can be counted on to throw a little offense in there, you know? So, as much as I like Andrew Peeke, he's obsolete now. And this is not to say he's bad. I think Andrew Peeke will thrive in a different situation. He feels like the kind of guy that's going to do what David Savard did a little bit. David Savard got traded to the Tampa Bay Lightning at the trade deadline and then proceeded to play extremely limited minutes with a young, offensively minded defenseman, and he thrived in that situation. Savard is now, I believe, the only adult on the Montreal Canadiens blue line, or like the only one over the age of 21. Like, that's not hyperbole. I believe he is the only adult that can legally drink on that blue line. But yeah, I feel like Andrew Peeke would really thrive getting traded somewhere like Colorado, for example. He plays limited minutes against weaker competition, thrives, and we put up with a bunch of tweets being like, wow, I guess Andrew Peeke just needed to get out of Columbus to succeed. That's what I see from him.
On my opening night roster, I probably do have him on the third D pair with Gudbranson. I'm probably starting him because I think now that you talked me through that there, I feel like he is absolutely the perfect third line defenseman. Like he can be good when he's not playing all the minutes in the game.
No, he is. He's a very good third pairing defenseman.
Because that's when we liked him.
Gudbranson.
Right.
And they inhabit, in my mind anyway, and maybe I'm completely wrong, they inhabit the same circles on the ice. I don't think they complement each other in the same way that, like, this is going way off grid, but the reason the Blue Jackets had such success with Seth Jones and Zach Werenski as that top defense pairing for so long is because those guys clicked. They had great chemistry. They each of their strengths was something that the other one was not necessarily as strong in. It was a real kind of give and take relationship. Andrew Peeke's strengths are all the same as Erik Gudbranson's strengths, and I feel like you need someone on that line that's not the same player as Erik Gudbranson. Because here's the thing, Erik Gudbranson is getting that roster spot over any of the other guys that we've mentioned. He just is. Andrew Peeke should not. Andrew Peeke probably will be there. But my guess is that they, as a defense pairing, if they stay together for very long, they're going to get caved in by any average or better team next season.
Yeah, and I don't want to see any more of that. Don't get me wrong, but I feel like he had 15 points in 82 games. That was the year before. That was the year that kind of really where he earned this contract. They said, you did this for us last year. September came around before the season, and they said, we're going to sign you to a 3-year deal. And I feel like if we can tap in back to that Andrew Peeke, and I know I just said the points numbers were the same, but I assume he played a lot less minutes in that year prior because the Jackets were healthier. But you're right. Like, Blankenberg's still a guy that I really, really like, and I still think has a lot to offer at the NHL level. Some people don't. I think that's unfair that they feel that way about Blankenberg. I think he can absolutely be a stay in the NHL, but that's a different story for a different time. If the Blue Jackets are going to keep Andrew Peeke, if they have any idea of keeping Andrew Peeke, they need to wheel him out there on the third line with Gudbranson. And if it doesn't work out, and if it goes exactly like the way that you just said, where they're not complimenting each other, then yeah, you got to rip them apart and you got to do something. But maybe
I just want to before
please.
I think we're going to go to break in a second.
Yes,
Andrew Peeke actually played more last season. He
you
played
mean 2 seasons ago?
In all situations. This season 16.99, last season 17.59.
Wow.
He was better. He was the second. He was second in the team on ice time. Gavrikov was first, and then Werenski came immediately after him. So,
wow.
Just before anyone comes for us about Andrew Peeke playing less, but his stats are not as good, and maybe this is a failure of me for and we can we'll go into a break in a second.
Yes.
But I just wanted to finish my thought. Like, maybe this is a failure on my part for paying attention to the eye test over advanced stats. I personally think that there's a happy medium in there. It's not all one thing or the other. He looked better last season, and I don't know if that's because he was playing with better players that made him look better. I don't know if that's kind of what's the opposite of recency bias? Distance bias, I guess, of knowing that he was probably outplaying his last contract. And now feels like he's underplaying. I don't know what he was making last season.
Neither do I. And while you look that up, we're gonna cook up our letter grades for him, and we'll have those for you in just a second. All right, time to throw a letter grade for our guy Andrew Peeke, who Jay just pointed out. The last 2 years played tons of time, produced very little. And he was making
1.5 last season. That feels way more in line. I think that's why I have such kind of quote unquote fond memories of last season's, because he is definitely, I think he was better than a $1.5 million player. Not last season, but the season before. I think this season he probably was about that. I don't think he's that's almost double. He got an almost 100% raise.
Yeah.
That's too much money for Andrew Peeke. I'm sorry. It just is.
It's too much money for Andrew Peeke if we're gonna get this version of Andrew Peeke. I'm hoping after playing 80 games this past season, he will take that experience, use what he learned from that season, work on his game in the offseason, and come out stronger. But if I'm giving a grade for what he did this past year with the Blue Jackets, it's a D-. It's just not good, man. It was not a good year for Andrew Peeke, and he had 6 goals. That's cool, but he can be a stay-at-home defenseman. Like, it's not all in the points numbers, but our goalies were just left out to dry far too often last year. Andrew Peeke, it felt like there were plenty of times, and I hate asking players to do this because it's dangerous as all get out, but jump in front of a few more pucks, Like, I played beer league with this guy who's a psychopath and jumps in front of all these pucks in a beer league game. I'm like, if my buddy Bill can dive in front of pucks left and right, in a beer league game. Why can't Andrew Peeke do that in an NHL game? And I think with this new contract kicking in, maybe that'll awaken something in him to be like, hey, I need to get going on my career here. I'm 25. I have an opportunity to stay with this club now. And I don't know. I feel like me as a player, I'd want to take advantage of that, but we'll see. We'll see what he does. And Jay, your thoughts on this past season? Grade?
I will say just before, my role this episode is to just correct Hayden on things.
That's cool. I need it.
He did block almost 200 shots.
Okay.
He blocked 197 shots. I'm trying to figure out where that lives in terms of
it's
on
pretty
the team.
Damn good. That's pretty good.
Which feels
I feel like he could have had more
about that. I don't know that he led the team, but he blocked a ton of shots. So I think
I need more blocked shots. I need more
blocked shots. Block all of the shots.
Yes, I need more. I mean, if you're going to compare him
over
to
the past 2 years, he has ranked 4th in the league in blocked shots. Yes, and this was as of March this year. First on the Blue Jackets in blocked shots, 8th in the NHL as of March of this season. So I don't know that we can realistically ask him to block more shots. But
wow, I feel so stupid. Right?
Okay. Let's mix that up a little bit. Let's rephrase that. Better defensive positioning.
Yes.
I don't necessarily think he needs to block more shots, but I would love to see him. I feel like every time a goal was scored when he was on the ice, I would go back and I'd watch the replay and he would be like off somewhere else. Like he'd either missed his man or blown his coverage or something like that. So I think that's my homework for him is defensive positioning. Also,
do you have a grade for him?
You want to be defensive or offensively minded, because I don't think you can do both, my guy. I'm going to be more generous than Hayden, which I know will be a shock to the people out there that think I am super negative and Hayden is super positive all the time. I'm giving him a C, because again, I feel like I've been grading these on a curve, and I feel like I should continue that. And Andrew Peeke played above his station for a long time this season. I think he should be given credit for doing the best he can when he is he finished the season after Gavrikov was traded. The top pairing was Andrew Peeke and Marcus Bjork for a long time, or Andrew Peeke and Erik Gudbranson, so he was really just doing his best to keep his head above water. And so I'm gonna give him a C. But yeah, I definitely need to see improvement from Andrew Peeke. And if he is traded before opening night, I'm not going to be super upset about that. I'm not going to be upset if he's on the roster opening night. I don't think it's the best option that we have. But I'm not going to be heartbroken if he goes somewhere else. In the same way that whoever I was talking about, Jack Rostovich. I'm not going to be heartbroken if he goes somewhere else. I'm not going to be heartbroken if he stays,
Yeah. I want to first of all say thank you, Jay, for correcting me on his block shots. I did not know that. I guess what I would ask of Andrew Peeke is you're absolutely right. There were so many goals that the Jackets gave up last year where I'm I feel like Andrew could have done a little bit more there. I want him to be more disruptive in the D zone, which is asking a lot, because if I ask you to be disruptive, then they could sneak in a pass behind you and then boom, where's the defenseman? Oh, he's way out of position. But I feel like we need to tap into that Andrew Peeke that when the Blue Jackets first got him, there was this, the second round draft pick that came in and was just putting bodies on the boards. That's the Andrew Peeke that I love. The Andrew Peeke that got in fights. He's had a couple scraps in his career. That's the kind of stuff I need. I don't know if that will work with Gudbranson because they're both scrappers. I think maybe it can, but you're right. They don't complement each other in that way because they have similar strengths and then they have the same weaknesses essentially. But I want Andrew Peeke to work out in Columbus, and yeah, keep blocking shots, dude. If you keep blocking shots, then you'll put a smile on my face. But my homework for him is to just commit to being more disruptive in the D zone. Commit to focusing on defense, because hey, if you become the next Seth Jones, then you're still going to get a bunch of assist points because you're going to be hitting Johnny Gaudreau on those deep stretch passes. So it's like you can still be an offensive defenseman by just focusing on defense, if that makes sense. That's my crappy beer league hockey opinion. But you got any more thoughts on our guy, Andrew Peeke?
I don't think so. Like, and here's the thing. I feel like we've been super negative. Most of these defenseman reviews are probably gonna lie on the side of being critical, but I feel like the defense as a whole was so bad, and that's not based on all of the defensemen are bad. I think it was poor defensive systems. I think it was, again, something we've talked about a little bit, and probably we'll talk about many more times. Is it a case of the defense being bad, leading to the goalies being left out to dry, or is it the goalies being less than good that led to the defense looking terrible? You know, like no one remembers the blown, like the missed coverage at the blue line if the goalie makes the save. You know, so I think probably Andrew Peeke will have a better season this year. I think Mike Babcock's system will probably lean towards having slightly more solidness. That's not a word. Solidity. That's also not a word. You know what I mean. It will be more solid on the back end than Brad Larsen's would have been. I would love for Andrew Peeke to have a back season. I'm rooting for him. I'm rooting for all the defensemen. You know, I'm not out here rooting for them all to fail and like cackling in my apartment when the Blue Jackets lose a game. Like I would love Andrew Peeke to be better. I just don't know if he'll be good enough to earn that spot. There's a lot of competition for that one spot.
There's a lot of competition. There is. And we have more player reviews to do. We will do former Blue Jacket, current Los Angeles King, Vladislav Gavrikov tomorrow. We'll do his season review. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Thank you for making this your first listen every day. Locked on Blue Jackets, again, is free and available on all podcast platforms, YouTube, and the SiriusXM app. I've been Hayden Heilsorn. You can find me on Twitter at HaydenH971. You can find Jay on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, Jacob with a K, an R after the O, and Foster. You can find the show on Twitter at LO_Blue Jackets. You can also email the show directly, lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening, and until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.